Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 6-game Major League Baseball slate. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? Also, make sure to note that there is a weather concern with the Chicago White Sox-Minnesota game. That said, I do think all the games play today, but we'll have to check back on that game closer to slate lock. Let's go ahead and get into it, though. So we're going to start with Logan Webb for San Francisco. Now, a 20 plus fantasy point game here is definitely doable. He's been mostly solid throughout the year, and he hasn't given up too many earned runs in most games. He's had a couple of bad games, but he's had mostly good ones. He's got a good K rate lately too, which give him some upside. Though there are a couple bats at Washington that I do like today, but I do think he's a viable option, even if one or two of those guys do manage to get some runs scored. He's got a good enough K rate that he can deal with a couple earned runs. And still get a 20 fantasy point game. Then we'll look at Zach Wheeler for Philadelphia. He definitely feels like a decent option today due to the matchup. He's had some good games this season. You can't rule out a 15 to 18 fantasy point range, though, as he's been around that range in 3 of the past 5 games, with the others being better. He's had some ups and downs throughout the season, but he definitely feels like a decent option on the slate, especially given that pitching has been really rough this week, and this slate looks like it's going to be pretty rough as well. Next, we'll look at Dylan Case for Chicago White Sox. Now, 6 in his past 8 games have been over 19 fantasy points, and Minnesota is a good strikeout team. However, they have hit the ball decently well recently as well. I think a 15 to 20 fantasy point game is in order here, though it does have a little bit of risk, but he also has some nice upside if he can have a really solid game. Then we'll look at Detmers for the Angels, and we would definitely feel like we're kind of grasping at straws today at pitching because he is facing Pittsburgh, who has a couple bats I like, but overall they are a good team to face from a pitching perspective. He had a streak of 20 fantasy point games 2 games ago, but then he ended up running into the Dodgers in Houston, which didn't, gave him some troubles. However, he has pitched pretty well recently, so I do think he had some viability here, though he does feel high risk, high reward. Then we're going to look at Alan Williams from Atlanta. Now, I am going to preface to say this is a Hail Mary play, as I do have some Milwaukee bats in my write-up, and I really do like them as a team today. He may only go 5 or so innings, but he's been really solid in the minors, as he had a 2.81 ERA and a 7-3 record in 13 starts. He still had 5 games coming off the bench, or in relief, and he had 89 strikeouts. The strikeout rate is not appealing, but he does have some good upside when it comes to just avoiding earned runs, and that could pay off here as he's nice and cheap. But he is high risk, high reward as a result, so you do want to keep that in mind. Moving into our catchers here, we're going to start with JT Realmuto for Philadelphia. He is averaging about 10 fantasy points a game lately. He's also had some home runs this last couple weeks, and that gives him some upside. He's also a little bit expensive today, though, so he is hard to roster as a result, but he's definitely in play on the slate. Sabal for San Francisco has hit the ball really well recently. He also has had a lot of home runs in the last 10 games, which really gives him a lot of upside. And he's got a pretty good matchup here against Washington's pitching, who's been really terrible this season. That said, he may not have the highest scoring fantasy point output, but he definitely has some good utility at his price. William Contreras is an interesting play for Milwaukee, as I do like his upside, as he's been hitting the ball extremely well recently, with over a 400 average over the last 10 games, and he's also hit Atlanta well this season already. In the first game, he scored 14 fantasy points and didn't even have a home run. However, this is a situation where I do want him to potentially hit a home run to pay off, and he is capable of that. But the way he's hitting the ball, he's hard to ignore. You can also consider Sean Murphy at catcher today. Moving to first base, we're going to start with Ohtani, who can play outfield as well as first base. He has absolutely just smashed the ball for 353 hours over the last 10 games, and he's had a whole bunch of games in a row with over 10 fantasy points. He's just hitting the ball extremely well, whether he pitches or not, which obviously he pitched yesterday, so he should be just batting today. But he's got really good metrics here and has good upside to have a good game. I really like his potential in this one. I also think Matt Olson is viable today for Atlanta, as he's facing a really positive situation from the pitching perspective. He's hitting the ball really well, has great metrics, and he has home run upside here as well. Lamont Wade Jr. is also in play. Now, he has been pretty rough recently in the fantasy point perspective, but he's still getting hits. He just hasn't gotten a lot of anything else. He's not getting a lot of runs scored or RBIs. But if he does start today, he'll be in play at this price, as he's decently priced. Josh Naylor is also in play for Cleveland. Now, I really do think Wheeler's a decent pitcher today, and Naylor's probably the only guy in Cleveland that I like quite a bit, as he's hit the ball extremely well lately with a 410 batting average over the last 10. He's also scoring a ton of fantasy points in that stretch, and he's getting some home runs as well. He's got some really nice upside here, and his hitting has just been extremely solid. If he draws a start today, he'll be a near must-play based on the price and his potential. Albies is a great option at second base, as he has been a little bit slumpy in the batting average lately, but he has hit the ball and got some earned runs, some RBIs and stuff recently, as well as doubles and triples. So he's capable of scoring earned runs even if he only gets one hit. Fantasy points even if he gets one hit, as he's done that, but his average has kind of dropped down some. I expect him to eventually get going again and get some home runs, and this is definitely a situation where he has a lot of upside in that home run department. Then we'll look at Eduardo Julian from Minnesota. Now, he has absolutely just crushed the ball for a 567 average over the last 10 games. He's hitting the ball extremely well. He's had hits in every one of those games, I believe, and then he only had one game against Baltimore where he didn't have one. He has just hit extremely well lately. He's got good home run upside as well, as he draws really good metrics for this game. I think he's a great play at second base, and he's also dirt cheap. It helps you pay up at other options. Then we'll look at third base, and we'll start with Jose Ramirez for Cleveland. He's another guy I like for Cleveland, though I don't like him quite as much as I like Naylor. But he does draw some utility here, as he's played really well recently, and he's had some good games, even without the home runs. He's been hitting the ball extremely well, and so I do like his upside, but he does feel high risk as his price is extremely high. Alex Bregman is also in play for Houston. Now, I do think Houston's a great team to stack against Oakland, and they are mostly pretty reasonably priced, with a couple exceptions. He definitely draws some good metrics here. He's hit the ball well against Oakland all season, and he's had 3 games in the last 4 over 14 fantasy points, and he's got home run potential as well, so he's a great option on the slate. Just a little bit pricey, but not super pricey. Jameer Candelario is also in play. He has hit the ball up and down throughout the season. He obviously has been scoring a good amount of fantasy points, even though he's not hitting a ton of home runs or anything. But he has hit better recently when the home run perspective, but his batting average has dropped off. I do think he's viable today, though. If you don't go with the pitcher for San Francisco and Webb, then he's definitely somebody to consider today. J.D. Davis for San Francisco also in play. Now, San Francisco is an interesting stackable team because some of their guys look really good metric-wise today, but they haven't hit the ball particularly well recently, and that is a bit of a concern. But they are, in decent price ranges, and he definitely draws in some good consideration. You could also consider Mike Moustakas at this position. Moving into shortstop, we're going to look at Willy Adames at Milwaukee. Now, he has hit the ball really well recently. He's improving his batting average a little bit, and he's been getting home runs as well. He's had several recently, so that gives him some upside, though he has had some bad games as well. So he's kind of a boomer bust play at this position, and he's a little bit expensive for that. But when he hits well, he's the guy that tends to have really good games. Then we'll look at C.J. Adams for Washington Nationals. Now, his batting average over the last 10 games has been absolutely ridiculous at .415. He's just mashing the ball. He's getting stolen bases, home runs, doubles, triples. He's letting a little bit of everything. He's not even striking out that much. He's only had 5 strikeouts in the last 10 games. And you can see he's only had 1 game under 10 fantasy points in that stretch. He just draws really good metrics. He's had stolen bases in 3 of the last 4 games as well. I really like him a lot. Even if you were to use Webb, he might be a good option to contrarian into your lineup anyway, because he just has that ability, if he can get on base, to do some things. Then we'll look at Nito for the Angels. Now, I did make him a core play, but I do preface this and say that he's a high-risk core play. I do think he's going to be popular because of how he's hit the ball recently, but there's a lot of, and there's not a lot of super cheap guys that kind of fit in that range, and Abrams is definitely available at this position as well. I struggled to figure out core plays today between him and Abrams, and then even adding in Alex Bregman at third base was a potential. So there's a lot of different ways you can kind of go with your core. So I think it's going to be kind of up and down from that perspective. I think there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat today. But he's definitely viable on the slate. You can also consider Trey Turner at this position. Maybe in the outfielders, we're going to start with Ohtani, obviously, who I already talked about at first base, and then Acuna. Now, he's very expensive, and he hasn't hit the ball quite as well the last couple weeks, since All-Star break especially, but he does draw some good metrics here, and he has home run potential and stolen base potential, as he always does. He's been getting walked more, and he hasn't been able to do quite as much, but I still think he's got some good upside here, and he's definitely in play on the slate, especially against a really terrible pitcher. Then we'll look at Jock Peterson for San Francisco. Now, he's been very inconsistent throughout the season. He does have home run upside in this matchup, though, as the metrics are off the charts, and he's actually priced okay. He's also been really good against Washington this season, but he is a little bit risky as he has been, in a bit of a slump lately. Then we'll look at Kyle Tucker, who is a core play for me for Houston. Again, Bregman could also be a core play today. But Tucker has hit the ball extremely well with a 389 average. His price has come up as a result, but he has had 4 home runs in the last 10 games as well. And he's had some absolutely monster games, as yesterday he hit three home runs and scored 44 fantasy points. That's pretty crazy. He's also had some other games recently that has been really solid. So he definitely has some upside here, and I do like Houston stacks quite a bit. Conforto for San Francisco has had a few good games recently. The betting average is a little bit strange because his good games have been really good and his other games have been kind of average, but he definitely has some utility here in a plus matchup against Washington. Then we'll look at Yelich for Milwaukee. Now, I really do like him, as I've liked him a lot recently. He's hitting the ball decently well with a 286 average, but he's had some really solid games, and even when he hasn't had a big game, he still managed to score some fantasy points in most of them and do some different things. So I do think he draws some good utility. Though he is pretty expensive, he's definitely viable on the slate. Bryce Harper has got some utility on this one, though he has hit the ball well. He hasn't had the home runs so far this season that we kind of expected. So he is in play, but he is high risk, high reward as kind of a contrarian play as a top tier option. Andrew McCutchen for Pittsburgh is interesting today against Detmers. Now, he has not hit the ball particularly well recently, and he's been up and down throughout the season, but he does draw home run metrics for this game, so he's high risk, high reward in that perspective. Then we'll look at Michael Harris for the Braves. Now, he's hit the ball really well, but he's not scoring a ton of fantasy points because he's not hitting a ton of home runs, though he does have stolen base potential. He does strike out a little bit too much still, but he has been hitting better, and he's had, I think, 7, 8 games in a row where it's a hit. Maybe he's missed one in one of those, but he has really good upside in this matchup, and I like his potential, especially if you go with an Atlanta stack. He's definitely somebody to consider. Maniac for LA Angels. He has hit the ball extremely well recently with a 419 average. He's also averaging over 11 fantasy points a game. I really like his upside, though he's been relatively consistent in just getting hits game to game, and his price is still pretty fair. And then last but not least, Taylor Ward for the Angels as well. If he draws the start today, he's hit the ball really well recently, and that gives him some good upside, as he's had 3 home runs in the last 10 games, and he's averaging a 300 average, which is above his normal, and he also has good home run metrics for this game as well. So Angels are definitely a stackable team, though they are somewhat hard to stack because Ohtani's so freaking expensive. Maybe in some sub $3,000 plays. Henry Davis for Pittsburgh is in play here as a sub $1,000 play. Alex Kirilloff for Minnesota is in play there as a good option. Max Kepler seems a little bit risky because he hasn't hit the ball particularly well recently, but he definitely has some utility here. Then we'll look at Trey Cabbage for the Angels. If he does draw the start today, he is an interesting option as he's hit the ball pretty well as he started his season just recently. Moustakis, who I mentioned in the write-up, is only $2,800. He has some more robust potential with home run upside. Thais for the Angels as catcher also has some upside, though very high risk, high reward if he does draw the start. And then Wallner for Minnesota, who has some interesting upside as he's hit the ball pretty well to start his season, though he doesn't have a ton of good fantasy point games. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.